This is a video explaining the research review project. Here's the worksheet. Let's get started. Part A is all about the topic that you're interested in your hypothesis. So it says write your research question. What are you curious about? So let's say I'm curious about violent media. Is violent media related to, I'm interested in if violent media is related to rape, or maybe I could have written in there violence against women. So I think that as people use more violent media, as that increases, then, so it says you write your hypothesis, what do you think is going to happen? If violent media increases, then I think that rape or violence against women, I think that that increases. Then it says identify the variables. This first one is your independent variable. So I'm highlighting, I'm right clicking. Doesn't want me to do that. All right. Yeah, okay, there it is. There we are. Copy. Oop, paste that in. And dependent variable is this guy up here, putting that in. All right, now we need to go find an article that looks at or is related in some way to these different variables. It doesn't have to be exact, it just has to be related. So we can go in and we can go to the library and we can go do a search there. I prefer Google Scholar. Google just knows how to do searches. They just do. So you're going to type in, you're going to go to Google Scholar, not to Google, but Google Scholar. Google Scholar is going to give you articles that are from peer-reviewed journals, academic journals, not just, anybody writing it. It's peer-reviewed journals. Now, what we want is we want to make sure to put in here the last 10 years, okay? And I'm going to put in my variables. So I put in violent media and violence against women. So I could have put in violent media and rape. I could have put in, you just try out a bunch of different things to see what comes up. So instead of violent media, if I find that, I'm not finding what I want, maybe I put in there violent video games or violent movies or object maybe I write movies with objectification of women. Just come up with different terms that are related in some way. So I put in violent media and, so you put in and in between the variables, and violence against women. Here I could put violent media and objectification against women, violent media and rape. Really, you just want to be creative and put in different terms and kind of go through these to see if you can find an article that has primary research. Primary research is when the authors are carrying out a study, a survey study, an experimental study, case study, something like that. Secondary research is when the authors are reviewing research that other people have done. We don't want that for the purposes of this research. I mean, that's good, but for the purposes of our research, I want you to review an article that the authors are carrying out their own study. So let's start off with the first one. Let's see if it's primary research, if it's relevant. So I clicked on it. Let's go to the abstract. Okay, so first of all, it starts off and it says a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis means that they are reviewing other people's research. We don't want that. We want primary research. Let's go to the second one. So here's the title. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on this. This is the full text. Now, say you found an article over here that you like, you read it, but it doesn't have the full text, it doesn't have a link over here to read the whole thing, then you go into North Country's library and see the online library and see if you can find that article. Or you can email B. O'Connor at nccc.edu and tell him what the article is and ask if he can help you find it. But a lot of times Google Scholar has the link, and so I'm going to right click onto the link and open it in another tab. Here's my article. So it says current research suggests a link. So they're just talking about what past research has been done. It says this study. When it says this study, that's good. That means that they're carrying out some research. It says this study is looking at video game playing and attitudes towards women. That's related to what I was interested in. It's not exactly, but it's related. It's looking at the effects of media and and how women are treated. So this article seems to be related to my topic of interest, and it says that it has an experimental design, so that's them carrying out the research. That's good. Okay, cool. So this looks like a pretty good article. So I'm going to use this article. So let's go back to, here's my worksheet. Part A was what you're interested, what do you think is going to happen? Now, part B is you breaking down the research article, saying what they did. So let's go back to Google Scholar, and what you do for your article, this is our article, you come here and you hit underneath where it says cite. I'm going to hit that, and look, it says APA. We want everything in APA format for sociology and psychology. So what I'm going to do is highlight this, and I'm going to right click and copy it. I'm going to come all the way down here, and on the next page, I'm going to paste that in. This is our reference page. So I'm going to put in references, and here we have our reference page just about done. So what you need to make sure is that you highlight that. I'm going to right click, go to paragraphs. I'm going to put hanging. Okay, and it should also be paragraph double space. It should be double space. Okay, so although they had, Google had this all set up, you have to check over it to make sure everything looks okay. So yep, it looks good. They have only the last names. That looks great, and the initials. The date, good. Here's the here is the journal title. APA has just the first letter capitalized, the rest lowercase. The first letter after the colon capitalized, the rest lowercase. They have the journal name with appropriate, capitalization. It's in italics, good. And then it has the volume number and the page number. All the information that it needs. Up here, for Part D, it shows you what you need for APA format. So we already have Part D done. Sweet, that's done. Okay, let's go back up here. It says the title. All right, so the title, what I could do is just come right down here. Here's the title. Let's highlight that. Let's, copy that. I could go up here, paste that in here. I can paste the author's names. So I could do that same thing, put that up there, put the date published, the volume, the journal name, put all that information up here. For the authors, I only want their last name and the initials. That's the APA format. So put that information in. What is their hypothesis? What are they interested in? What do they think is going to happen? So I'm going to go back to the article, and if it doesn't say the hypothesis in the abstract, you're going to have to go through and kind of look it up. The introduction is them going over research that has already been done. So you don't really need to report on that. It provides background, but it doesn't tell about their research. Really, you go to the end of the introduction, and they're going to say usually what the hypothesis is. Their hypothesis is. It says to address the issues. This study is looking at video games and the rape myth research. So I went through and I read this introduction, and through the introduction, I could clearly see that they felt that, through reading that, they felt that as video games. So let's go back over here. Video games. Let's go to the abstract. Let's see how they said it. They said that video games depicting sexual objectification, they think that it was going to increase rape myth acceptance. People saying that accepting the myth that the women wanted it or it was justified or so on. So you just kind of have to read through and find out what they say, what they think is going to happen. So they said that if video games depicting sexual objectification, did I spell that right? As those increase, as people watching those increase, then they think that people accepting these rape myths that the women wanted it or it was justified, they believe that as people watch more of these video games or play more of these video games, then there's going to be an increase in the acceptance of the myth. So I got that really from reading the abstract as well as from reading the introduction. Remember, the introduction gives a background of the research, but it also kind of tells, you can get a feel for, in the introduction, for what they think that they're going to find. If they don't say it outright, you get a feel for it. Okay, then you go down to the methods. In the methods, they're going to explain the participants, how they went about studying it. Now, see, in this case, they have all these different research questions. Just pick one of them. Just pick one and report on. I don't need to know about all the different questions. Just pick one. So, question 1 was looking at, does depictions of violence against women in video games influence rape supportive attitudes? So I would go through and I would talk about here, this says the sample, who was in the sample. So here, who's in the study? Here they're talking about it. Don't just copy and paste it. I want you to read this and then be able to write that information, some of that information in here. So how many people were in the study? I think it said 110 in there. And they go on to talk about the number of women, the number of men. You might go into talking a little bit about the race. In that same area of the article, they'll talk about how they selected the population or how they selected the sample. And then the research design, that'll be in the methods area as well. So what are the instruments? How did they go about studying, doing the experiment? How did they measure the variables? Who was in the control group? Who was in the experimental group? And then it'll talk about the results. So if you have the different questions and you only have to focus on one question, so just report on the results. Now the results section, actually, we'll get into a lot of the statistics. I don't really need to know about the statistics. Really, you can go down to the discussion area and they break it down and they explain what the results were in more words type way, more of a descriptive type way rather than numbers. And so then you will put that, the research design, that's in the methods area. And then what were the results? And then what were the weaknesses and limitations? Often they'll talk about in the discussion area and in the conclusion. They'll talk about how there were some issues in the design of the study. Maybe they didn't get a very randomized sample, or maybe they used more women than men. So just read through the discussion and the conclusions, and they'll usually spell out the weaknesses and limitations. So that will fill out the part B. So part B was all about what the research article says. Part A is what you think is going to happen for the topic. Part C is you doing a little write-up on a separate sheet of paper, 1 to 2 paragraphs that answers the question, does the research discussed in the article, so the research discussed in the article that we were just looking at, support the hypothesis that you wrote for up here? Make sure to specify if the article supported or did not support your hypothesis. Do not write proved, okay? We don't say something was proven in science because new research can come out, or really the data only supports the hypothesis for that sample of people. We don't really say that the research proved the hypothesis. So don't say proved. And then the references, we already did the references. I showed you how to do that. So that's how you do the project.